In this video I'm going to show you how to do join as you go for the final round of the motif. This particular one is just per motif, so this is useful if you're doing a different colour for each final round where you're joining. You can also use it for if you've got the final round all the same colour. Obviously it's better to use the continuous join as you go method for that because there's less ends to sew in, but what you'll find is you'll probably end up using a mixture of the two to get, you know, if you need to make slightly more complicated shapes for your sweater. So this technique is exactly the same principles regardless of the size of the motif. So here we've got a 4-round motif. For this sweater I've got a 6-round motif, and it's exactly the same principle that I've used to join both motifs. So to practice this join as you go with a different colour each round, you can use the same colour each round as well if you like, but when you're practicing it's actually better to use a different colour because it helps you to better see where your stitches are going in comparison to the adjacent motif if it's a different colour. So what you need to do is you need to make 4 motifs. One of them make it all the way up to round 4, and then the other 3 you're only making them up to round 3. And we're going to join them in this order. This is motif A, then we're going to join B, then we're going to join C, and then we're going to join D. So you need to decide on your colours, which colours you're going to use to join. So I think I'm going to use that colour for this one, this colour for this one, and this colour for this one. As you're practicing it doesn't really matter too much, especially if you're not going to, if this isn't your chosen yarn and you're not going to end up making your sweater out of this, you don't need to worry too much. I'm just going to make sure what I'm doing, so I'm just going to move that one over there for the minute, and motif C and its colour up there. So I'm going to be joining this motif B onto motif A. So the first thing we're going to do is make as much of this 4th round as we can before we need to join it. So if you take a look here, you are going to be joining at this corner, along this side, and on this corner. So that means I could make quite a large part of this border motif before I need to start joining. So the reason for this, to do as much as you can before you join, is because as the piece starts to get bigger it becomes slightly more difficult to attach motifs. So the more you're doing of the round before you attach it to your sweater, the easier it is to manage really. It's not vital that you do that, it's just kind of a good practice really. So we are doing the 4th round, apart from the joining obviously, we are going to do the 4th round slightly differently than we do for the main motif. So it's the same stitch sequence, we're just going to start it slightly differently. And what we're going to do is we're going to start the yarn between the second set of clusters. So this is between the first set of clusters and this is between the second set. You could actually start there or there, it doesn't really matter, but in the written pattern I'm going through here. Obviously if you've made a bigger motif or a motif with more rounds, you just basically trying to start somewhere along the edge, because it's easier if you start on a corner and you're joining on a corner. It makes it quite tricky sometimes. It's not impossible, it's just a slightly different technique. So let's start on an edge, join the yarn however you like. As you know, I like to hold the tail end at the back, pull up the loop and then proceed in pattern, which in this case is chain 3. This is counting as a stitch. Then we're going to put 1 double crochet into the same space. So the very first cluster we're only making a partial cluster, because when we come back round and we come back to finish off this cluster, it looks a lot neater when the chain is in the middle of the cluster rather than on the edge. So that's why I'm doing that. You can feel free to tweak this pattern to your own preferred way of crocheting. So next up, we've got a corner, which you should now be familiar with, is 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. So to give you an idea of where I'm coming from here, and to match the written instructions, I'm going to start here. So you could have started here, gone around. You could start there, go around. Obviously once you've done that bit, you can't join it there, so it's just a little bit of forward thinking and remembering that you're always working clockwise around. It might seem complicated at first, but once you get into the swing of it, you probably won't even you'll be doing it, really processing how you're going to go quite quickly without even really thinking about it. So let's finish off this side. We're going to put 3 double crochets in there and 3 double crochets between that set of clusters. Now we're coming to the next corner, and this next corner we're actually going to join into this corner. So I start off the corner as normal with a chain 3. So with the corners and the joins, you've always got to think of where the halfway point is. So we've got, if you remember, there's a chain 2 in the middle there. So the halfway point is straight after the chain 1. You've got 3 double crochet, chain 1, and that is halfway along that corner. If you're joining different types of crochet motifs, it's the same kind of principle. So we're going to chain 1. Now we've made half of that corner. Next we are going to join this motif to this motif in this chain 2 space corner, and the way we're going to do that is just with a slip stitch, and we go from the right side of the fabric, so the top, through to the bottom, i.e. the wrong side, and then we're just going to slip stitch, which is just pulling up the loop. So don't make this slip stitch too tight. You don't want it too loose either, because it looks messy, but you want it just sort of, you know, just a sort of medium tension, because you're going to need to work into that again later. Now finish off this corner. So remember, we've already done a chain 1. The slip stitch doesn't count as anything, it's just the join. We're doing the chain, another chain, which counts as the second chain of the corner, and then we're going to finish off with the 3 clusters for the rest of the corner. So let's just have a little look at that, where we are now. So you can see we've made this corner, gone along the top, joined in this corner, and now we're ready to join all down this side. So the side joins are done with a, what I call a drop loop join. So we're not making any stitch. So here with the slip stitch, we've made a stitch in the corner, but on the sides we're not making any stitch, because that can look messy. So if you're doing a slip stitch here like this, it leaves this sort of quite ugly mark that I'm not really very keen on. Some people do it that way. If you're using the same colour, if you've got the same colour motif, i.e. a unicoloured sweater, then that often is fine and doesn't really make that much difference. But when you're using a different colour, I find a drop loop join much more attractive. So drop loop join, remove the loop from the hook. You might want to just pull it open a tad so that you don't accidentally undo your work. And then the same on this side, you're going between the next set of 2 clusters here. You're going between from the right side, i.e. the top, through to the wrong side, i.e. the bottom of the motif. You're going to put that loop back on the hook, and then all you're doing is just pulling the loop through. That's all you're doing. You're not making any stitches. You're literally just removing the hook, going in between the corresponding chain 3 cluster space, putting the loop back on the hook and pulling it through. And again, what you don't want to do here is pull that too tight, because it can pucker it can make the two motifs not lie flat. At the same time, you don't want it really loose, because then when you make your next stitch, you've got a big ugly thing there. So the key is just to pull it up until it's just nice and flat like that, and then keep control of that tension while you continue in pattern with the next set of 3 double crochets. So let's just have a little look at that. As you can see, that's made a nice neat little join there while still keeping the motifs nice and flat. And then we're just going to proceed in pattern, but after every single 3 double crochet cluster, we're going to drop the loop off the hook, go in between the set of 3 double crochet clusters on the adjacent piece, and pull that live loop through, making sure it's not too tight and not too loose. Again, this is something that as you're working, that will just come to you naturally without really thinking too much about it. And again, you know, as I always say, don't be afraid to undo something. If you've done it and it doesn't look right, it's only 3 stitches, just undo it and do it again. Another drop loop join in between the stitches of this motif A, pull up the loop of motif B, and now we're ready to make the next corner. So remember, this is a corner join because we're joining it onto this corner of motif A. So we need to make half a corner first, which is 3 double crochet, chain 1. Corners are always joined with a slip stitch because it's more stable, and it also becomes an anchor point for further joins. So slip stitch, remember, we're not taking the hook off the loop, we're going into that corner from the right side to the wrong side, i.e. top to bottom, slip stitch, which is just pulling up the loop. Now we're going to finish off that corner, chain 1, 3 double crochet into the same space. Let's have a quick look at what that looks like. Okay, pretty good. So, oops, don't want to undo that. So what I'm going to do now is continue in pattern around this bottom edge, the corner, and the first edge we started on, and I'll come back to you when I'm ready to finish off this partial motif. Just finishing off this last full cluster, and now I'm back to the beginning. Remember, we'd put a chain 3 and then a double crochet in there, so to make that cluster match the rest, I need to put 1 double crochet in there and then join with a slip stitch. So treat into the 3rd chain of your beginning chain 3. Always treat that chain as if it was a normal stitch, front loop, back ridge on the back of the hook. Avoid going round the whole thing, it leaves a big hole. Avoid catching one loop, it looks distorted, makes it distort. Treat it like a stitch, front loop, back loop. Grab the yarn, pull it through the chain stitch, continue and pull it through the live loop. Get your scissors, snip the yarn. You can leave a longer tail than that, I always leave short tails. Yarn over that little tail end, pull that through the live loop, pull it tight, and that's fastening off. Okay, let's have a little look. So this is what it should look like after you've joined motif B to motif A. The other thing I would say, which I didn't mention right at the beginning, is that at this point where you've made all your motifs up to a certain round and you're ready to join, I would strongly advise sewing in all the ends apart from the very last end before you start joining. And that's just because it the tail ends can get in the way. It can make things a bit confusing if you've got loads of ends hanging down, and also it just saves you a massive job at the end when you've finished and you just want to wear your sweater and you've got all these ends to sew in. So that is a very I would strongly suggest doing that. Okay. The other thing I would suggest is when you're doing this is to do it on a table or a flat surface rather than sitting on the sofa on your lap. It's just when you're getting the hang of it, it can be quite easy to get yourself into a bit of a mess. So that's why I would recommend doing it this way. I'm actually going to swap those. Oh no, I'm going to stick with that. Okay, so I'm now ready to join motif C onto motif B. But what you'll notice is something slightly different about this one is that you'll also be joining at a corner where there's already 2 motifs joined. So that's what we're going to cover with this next step. The rest of it is exactly the same as what we've just done. It's just a slight difference at this point here. So again, we're going to partially make this edge. So I'm going to start at this edge, on this edge here between these clusters. I'm going to work my way around and then I'm going to join here, join along here, and then go back up here and finish. So start off in the same way. Chain 3, counts as a double crochet. Make a corner, three double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet, three double crochet between each cluster. So I'm just going to carry on until I get to the point where I want to join, and then I'll come back to you. So I'm coming up to the point where I'm ready to do my corner join. So I'm going to make half a corner, which is 3 double crochet, chain 1. Now I'm going to join in this corner join where I've already made a join. And the trick for a really lovely neat join, a lot of these sweaters you see online, it really bothers me that the corners don't match up properly. They can be looking quite messy. And obviously that's the beauty of making your own, is that you can make sure that everything is spot on. So the trick is to find the slip stitch join that you made from the previous round and find the legs of it. So you can see this is the motif A and this is the slip stitch join for motif B. Sometimes it might look a bit different. It might, if you've done it a bit tight, it might look like that, in which case you just need to kind of push the top of the stitch over to the left so that you can see the little legs of the stitch. Then you are going to insert the hook through the legs from the right to the left, like this. And then you're going to make your slip stitch join. So you're just pulling up a loop, and then you're going to finish off that corner. Chain 1 and 3 double crochet in the corner. So let's have a quick little look what that looks like. So what you'll notice is that because you've worked into that slip stitch from right to left, it's actually opened it up into a neat little ring. So what that means is that when you come to join this other motif, you will also be going into that exact same spot, and that's what keeps these corners looking super neat and lined up properly. So you can probably guess now that we are going to do a drop loop join all along this edge. Allow the loop to fall off the hook, pull that loop back through the appropriate space on the adjacent motif, and you do just need to be a bit careful about your controlling your yarn at the point where you're doing the drop loop join. You're pulling that through, and it's the point where you start doing the double crochet that you can lose control of things a bit. So you can either, at the point where you're happy with the how large this drop loop join is going to be, you can either use your index finger to control that yarn over until you've made that. It's just the first stitch that's the one where you can get a bit messy, or the other way to do it is to really keep very tight tension, so pulling away with this hand while you're making that stitch to stop that loop opening up. So either way, whichever way you prefer, it's always that first stitch is the trick, keeping it nice and neat so your work looks professional. So I actually tend to just increase my tension on this working yarn when I'm making that first double crochet after the drop loop join. Okay, so that's looking good. I'm ready to make another corner. So I've already put 3 in that corner, so I need to make a half corner, so I need to do the chain 1, and remember the corners are a slip stitch join. So go into the corner from top to bottom, right side to wrong side, pull up a loop, you've done a slip stitch, and again remember this slip stitch, you're probably going to work into that again at some point, especially if you are making a sweater, because obviously you're joining everything into a loop to fit around your torso. If you're making a blanket and this is going to be one of the edges, of course it doesn't matter too much, although you might also need to work into it depending on what your border design is. But anyway, not too tight. Chain 1 to finish off the corner, and 3 double crochet to finish off that corner section. Finish off this edge. We're back to the beginning, and we need to remember we've only got 2 in there. We're going to finish off with 3, and we're going to slip stitch join into the 3rd chain of the beginning chain 3. 1, 2, 3. Treat it like a stitch. Front loop, back loop, slip stitch join, cut the yarn, fasten off by yarning over, pulling through that tail end through the live loop, pulling tight, and I'll leave that, that's long enough. Okay, let's have a little look where we're at now. Okay, so we've got motif A, B and C joined and ready to go. Now we're going to do motif D, and again this is basically the same, slip stitch joins in every corner, drop loop joins along the edges. Make as much of the 4th round as you can before joining. The only difference with this one is that you're joining in a spot where you've already got 3 motifs joining. But fortunately, because you have done this very neat and beautiful join in the very first slip stitch you made, it's quite clear to see, especially when you're using different colours like this, where you're going to be going, because you've got this little ring made by the legs of the very first slip stitch that you made. When you're using the same colour, it's a bit more difficult to see, but once you get familiar with it, it becomes easy to spot. So I'm going to be using this green, and I'm going to start up here, I think. Make a corner, make a side, join at a corner, drop loop joins along this edge, corner join at this point here, and then drop loop joins here, corner join here, finish off. So I'm going to start off as usual, and I will meet you at the first join. Come to the first corner join, making half a corner, chain 1, joining in this corner here, right side to wrong side, through the chain 2 space, make a slip stitch, chain 1, finish off the corner. Drop loop join all along this edge here, making sure I'm keeping my tension quite tight by pulling in the opposite direction with this left hand for that very first stitch, just to make sure that drop loop join doesn't open up and look messy. Now I can go back to my normal tension. And another drop loop join. Drop loop join. I think the other thing I'm doing when I'm trying to keep this drop loop join from opening up is, as I'm crocheting this first stitch, I'm going to start the corner now, as well as I'm kind of pulling away with my left hand, I'm sort of actually pulling the hook more to the right as well, because that helps to intensify that great tension. Obviously don't go too mad, otherwise your work won't sit flush if you pull it too tight. Okay, so I've done the first part of that corner, which is chain 3 double crochet, chain 1, slip stitch into this corner. So let's have a little look here. We've got our slip stitch join, the very first one we made with motif B, and then when we worked motif C into it, we opened it up into this little ring, which we're now going to slip stitch into. Chain 1, finish off the corner, 3 double crochet. Have a little look at that lovely neat join. I'm going to carry on up along this edge doing my drop loop joins. Last corner, chain 1, slip stitch into the chain 2 corner of motif C, chain 1, 3 double crochet. Finish off the side. Finish off the first cluster. Slip stitch join into the third chain of the beginning chain 3, cut the yarn, fasten off. Let's have a little look now. And there we have it. We've joined 4 motifs together, and of course you can join any number of motifs in any kind of geometric shape by just following the same procedure row by row. And here's an example of a larger piece of fabric that I have made basically just adding on to that 2x2 piece I had before, and I'm going to keep adding to this as I continue to make my sweater. One thing I'll just point out is that if you've done the way I join the yarn, i.e. just holding the tail at the back when you start this 4th round, a joining round, where it might not be the 4th round if you've made a bigger motif, but if you have done that, then you just need to take a little bit of extra care when sewing in that end. So even if you've caught it in, go one way, make sure you're catching in a bit of something there, go one way through the cluster, and then sometimes I actually split one of the legs, go through it with the yarn just to double make sure it's going through. Not going to undo what I've just done, and then go back the other way. So this particular tail, I like to make sure is particularly secure because of the way I've started it, because you don't want it coming undone, and that is enough to keep it nice and secure.